Oh, I know that sound. It's time for the Beer and News Report. Hi, and welcome to the Beer News Report. Cheers. Did you catch that? If you didn't, stop the video, go back to the beginning, and look for a difference. All right? Because there is a difference. Now, if you did catch it, congratulations. You have noticed that I'm not using my regular mug, right? The one that says Artie on it. I got this as a birthday present from my parents, and it holds about 12 ounces. But then a viewer of mine found out that it was my birthday this week, and she got me a new mug. And this one, as you can see, says Beer and News Report, BNR, Beer and News Report on it. But look at the size difference. This is twice the size of this one. So I've put in 2 beers. Obviously I've made some mistakes already. But Tony, she didn't want her picture on here. Tony Kimple, thanks a lot. I appreciate it. You're my biggest fan. And here's to you. Cheers. Now, I get emails and comments from all my viewers. Well, not all my viewers, but a lot of my viewers. And one of them is my nephew, Gary Maurice. And he said he'd like to see a show on something regarding children, COVID, and going to school, right? Should we send our kids to school or not? Now, this wasn't at the top of my list because I don't have any kids. But I started noticing on nextdoor.com that my neighbors were talking about this. And then on Facebook, one of my friends put this on there. As you can see, this person is saying that there's a 99.96% chance of living through COVID. Now, I checked with the CDC, and at the time, these numbers were correct. I double-checked the math, and that's all correct. So that must be true. Your chances of living through the COVID-19 virus are 99.96%. And then I thought, hey, this is a statistic trying to prove a point, but not really telling the full story. And if you remember from my show on police killings, I talked about how statistics can be used to prove anything. Here's a statistic that doesn't tell a full story. If COVID-19 numbers stop spreading on this day that this person put out those numbers, then yes, everything is correct and the scare is over, right? We made it through the virus. Cheers. Wait a minute, though. COVID-19 hasn't stopped spreading. Check the numbers. We're well above 161,842 deaths. So that 99.96 survival rate, it's going down. It's still very high, and that's giving a lot of people a false sense of security, right? I mean, people are going out. They're not afraid to go out to bars and have parties. They're not wearing a mask. They're standing close to each other. And then we get these local outbreaks, and everything has to be shut down again. Until we get a vaccine, the virus will spread until we reach herd immunity. And if you remember from my COVID trivia show, part 2, herd immunity is when a large percentage of the population has gotten infected, and now they have the immunity for that virus, and they isolate the non-infected people from the virus. So that's usually between 70 and 80%. Wait a minute. Art, we have a flu vaccine, and people get the flu every year. Yeah, that's true. We do have a vaccine for flu, but less than 50% of the population take the flu virus, so we never actually get the herd immunity. Now, let's go back to that chart and use a 70% positive infection rate and see how many will die. At 70%, the positive infections go to 231,700,000. At 0.25% death rate, that means that 6 million, almost 6.4 million people will die. I mean, that's still a 98% survival rate. So here's the question. If you know that 1 out of 50 people are going to die, would you send your child to school? I'll give you a second to think about it. Cheers. For most people, the answer is no. I went to high school. There was about 1,200 kids there in total, and my class alone was 400 in the freshman class. That means in total, 24 kids would die, and out of my class, 8 of them would die. It feels a little bit like Russian roulette. Now, the numbers I gave are for fatalities, but pretty much everyone is going to come down with COVID because we're assuming a herd immunity or at least 70% infections. So how does that affect your decision to send your child to school? Let's consider the health of the child. If they have asthma, that's probably a high chance they're not going to make it. What about diabetes? I mean, it's not as bad as asthma, but it's not good. And what if they have a non-respiratory autoimmune disease like Crohn's disease? Well, since it's an autoimmune disease, that's telling you that their immune system is compromised, so that's not good. But it's not a matter of not sending these kids to school. I mean, if you have more than one kid, if you send, let's say all the other kids are healthy, if you send the healthy kids to school and they come back with a virus, that's going to affect the weakened child. So really, you can't send any of your kids to school if you want to play it safe. But wait a minute, didn't kids go back to school during the Spanish flu? Yes, that's true, and that's a very good point. So let's have a drink and talk about this. Cheers. The fact is, the U.S. hasn't really had a big pandemic like this since the 1900s when the Spanish flu hit. And pretty much anyone who was around at that time is now dead. So this is all new to us. And like the old saying goes, if you don't remember history, you're doomed to repeat it. So in this show, I want to put you in the frame of mind of the early 1900s when the Spanish flu pandemic was going around. And I'm going to do this by asking questions and then answering them so that you can see what was going on in 1918 when the Spanish flu was around and compare that to what we're doing now. All right? So, for example, did people wear masks during the Spanish flu? Well, first off, they didn't have the N95 mask, but yes, they wore cloth masks. And it should be noted that there were a lot of diseases going around back then. You had the measles, the mumps, polio, and even tuberculosis. People wore masks against all these diseases. Did they close down schools and businesses? Yes, schools and businesses were temporarily closed until a crisis was over. And as you can see from these newspaper clippings, basically all public places were closed. It got so bad that in Alabama, they wanted people to stop kissing. Did they have homeschooling? Not really. In those days, most kids only went to school until the 8th grade. And then they usually got a job around the age of 15 or 16. You see, back then there were no child labor laws. Also, there was no internet, no computers, no TV, even radio was rare. So, without a school book, you really had nothing to do. What did the federal government do or say? The federal government played down the virus because they were in the middle of World War I. They had to keep morale up because of the draft. Actually, many countries downplayed the pandemic because they were also at war. I mean, it was called World War. Well, except Spain. Spain was neutral, so its press was free to publicly announce that they had the pandemic. And since they were the only ones to announce it, the pandemic was called the Spanish flu. That'll teach you to go off blabbing to everyone. I had to have a drink. Popcorn would be great with this. Hey, Mom, we got any popcorn? Okay, back to the show. All right, if the federal government wasn't doing anything, did the states do anything? Since the federal government was focusing on the war, the states took it upon themselves to initiate safety protocols. So cities like Seattle and San Francisco, they ordered people to wear masks. But many other cities didn't. Like New York City, they never closed their schools. They contended that their schools were cleaner than your homes. But 2 studies published in 2007 in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences looked at the effect of health measures in more than 15 cities in 1918, including mask laws, business hour restrictions, the shuttering of schools, theaters, churches, and dance halls. Both studies found that cities that acted earliest and most forcefully, like St. Louis, which imposed a near total lockdown within 2 days of the first Spanish flu case, had much lower death rates than cities that hedged their bets, like New Orleans, Boston, and Philadelphia. So how long did the Spanish flu last? The Spanish flu lasted from the spring of 1918 to the summer of 1919, so roughly a year and a half, and it came in 3 waves. The first wave was in late spring of 1918, starting from a military hospital in Kansas. Hey, wait, the COVID virus started in the spring of 2020. It's kind of similar. Now, the second wave hit in late September of 1918 when the kids were in school. This was the biggest wave which killed the most people. Well, now that's interesting because the infection rate of the COVID virus is currently going down, but schools are starting to open back up again. Will we also get a second wave? Only time will tell. Now, the third wave hit in the early months of 1919. Hopefully, by the early months of 2021, we have a vaccine for COVID and can stop the third wave. What advantages do we have now compared to 1918? A lot. We can do testing. Back in 1918, the microscopes weren't powerful enough to see a virus, so no one knew what the Spanish flu was. We now know that COVID-19 is a virus. We know the form of the virus and we can test for it. We know how to make vaccines and how to mass produce them once they've been approved. This beer's going down really good. Hey, Mom, the popcorn! Now! I never know what she's doing. So what is history telling us? Well, it's already proven that face masks work. Staying 6 feet apart, social distancing. And then in the time of crisis, closing public places. Work, school, theaters, bars. And remember, the way they made it through the Spanish flu of 1918 was by herd immunity, meaning that 70 to 80% of the population got infected. Now, how many people died in the Spanish flu of 1918? It was 675,000. Well, heck, we're at 200,000 right now. We're a third of the way there. Seemingly, to the untrained eye, that would be the case. But the population in the U.S. at that time was 103.2 million. Now, our population currently is 326.7 million. So that would mean that at least 3 times as many people should die, about 2.1 million, by the time we're through this virus. Unless, of course, we get a vaccine. Then the infection rate should go down to 0, and thus no more deaths from COVID. Here's to getting a vaccine. Cheers. Is there anything else that we should be concerned about? Well, it's interesting that you should ask that. Because when COVID first came out, we were really only testing for the flu. So some of the early COVID cases were misdiagnosed as the flu. Or I should say only the flu. Then we learned how to test for COVID, and we started to learn how the COVID infections grow. And then this doctor, who was really smart, figured out she had the COVID virus, but she tested for the flu also and found out she had the flu too. I mean, nobody was doing dual test. Usually you go in, you get tested for COVID. If you don't have it, oh, you must be sick. And then if you go in and they test you for the flu, okay, you got the flu. That's what's making you think they never tested for COVID. So this is relatively new. And researchers aren't sure if the viruses fight each other or if they help each other or if they just go and do their own thing. But the thing to note is that we're not really in flu season yet. And that happens at the end of the year. So if it turns out that the two viruses help each other, then this second wave coming, it's going to be a Lulu. And if you're not taking the flu vaccine now, this is the year to start. All right, so here's to getting that flu vaccine. Cheers. Well, you can see my beer's almost empty. That was a hard one to go down. So it means that we're at the end of the show. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something in these crazy times. Please email me with your questions and comments at this email address. And of course, hit that subscribe button if you want to be notified by YouTube of upcoming shows when I newly posted them. And always keep your beer cold and your interests hot. Cheers.